CBT Nuggets JNCIA series, getting started with the J series router and the EX series switch. Alright, what are we going to do in this first real content nugget of this JNCIA series? Well, you've arrived, okay? We show up hypothetically in our minds at Nugget Lab and we're ready to get started, okay? You've gotten that job, you received that job. So what is the process that we've gone through over the next 10 days to get you there? We're going to begin right now. So we'll log into that first device and we'll kind of get our feet wet and check it out, right? Then the first thing we realize, we have to upgrade our operating system because it's an older operating system. We want to work on the newest code available to us right now. So we're going to do that, all right? And then we'll finish up looking and checking out an EX series switch. Now we're going to look at the EX series switch here in this nugget, but we won't return to it because in the JNCIA, you're not responsible for the switch. We don't get into that till the JNCIS, which is the nugget to follow this one. So we'll focus on the router, the J series router. So let's get started. Okay, now for us to be successful, we're going to have to visualize success, visualize the future. We're going to see ourselves walking in to Nugget Lab on that first day of work, and we're going to walk in there and we're going to think about, okay, we've done our paperwork, and now we're going to sit down in the data center, in the server room, on our management station, and what are we going to do? Well, from a Junos standpoint, the first thing we want to do is we want to get started on our J series router and our EX series switch. And that's what we're going to do. But when you get in there, you've got to do some information gathering. You've got to get some documentation. So you're going to obviously want to look around and see what kind of physical documentation we have. Anything that's written down, any Visio diagrams of the logical topology, of the physical topology. Do they have a written security policy? Okay. What about information like your user accounts and vendor account logins at juniper.net? What contacts do you have with vendors? All that information. Okay, so we've gotten that and we're now ready to go access our first device. So we're going to jump on the 2350. And in this process of visualizing success and seeing our future, we're going to be learning about how this phenomenal operating system works. So we're going to open up TerraTerm on the management station and we're going to console into that 2350. Now here's the deal. Right off the bat, on a new system, the only predefined user is the root user. So, and you can see I've already logged into this machine because I've already renamed this to 2350. That's okay. But I'm going to type in root. That's the only user I have, and it is kind of the godlike root user. That should also tell you, after I put my password in here, that we are on a Unix-like system. Okay? Now, why do I say Unix-like? Well, Junos is actually a fork, or it's based on FreeBSD. That's basically the free version of the Berkeley software distribution, and this is a Unix-like OS. We can't call it Unix because legally it's not Unix, okay? But the Berkeley software distribution actually led to things like the Microsoft TCP/IP stack, it led to Mac OS X, and of course it led to Junos OS. So this is FreeBSD. I have to know that for the exam. That's why we have that Unix type root user. And as a matter of fact, if you know Unix, or if you can learn it as we're going through this process, you'll be more powerful. Now the first thing I discovered when I logged on here is it showed me my Junos operating system build. So one thing I've discovered is that I'm going to have to upgrade this operating system on this 2350 because it's Junos 9.1 R18 from about April of 2008. So I want to get this up to the most recent operating system. And so that's going to be one of our first tasks. And we're actually going to use a web-based utility, the JWeb, to do that. Now, you can see we've got this initial prompt, which is basically the root user is at the %sign. Okay. Now you could go into the system if you want to do Unix type commands on the underlying operating system. We could refer to this as the shell command or the shell, where we could actually go from here into the underlying kernel of the Junos operating system and do all kind of dangerous things. At this point in our knowledge, we're definitely not going to do that. But I want you to remember there are two classes or two types of users on a Juniper Network systems. There's the root user, which, like all users, has to be authenticated before they can access the switch. Now, I actually had a password because the first time I came in here, it made me configure my root password before I could commit my configuration changes. Okay, so before I could take the changes that were in RAM and commit them to the operating system, to the active configuration, I had to configure the root authentication, and that's important to remember. But the very first time you come in here, you'll do login root on a new system, and there'll be an empty password. So you just hit enter at the password prompt. Okay. Now remember, any of the changes that you do, you can, for 2 hours you can sit there on that device and you can make all kinds of changes to what we call the candidate configuration. But until you actually create a root authentication password credential, you'll not be able to commit those changes. Now, the other type of user is the non-root user. And I could log in after the fact as a non-root user and then use the su command, the Unix su command, really, Linux, to switch over to the root user if I wanted to do that. So that's two differentiations, the root users and the non-root users. But remember, the root user is the only predefined user. And we'll look at creating our other options in upcoming nuggets. Now, another differentiation is this. If I want to get in and really do anything on this 2350, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into what's called operational mode. I do that by typing in CLI, or command line interface. That's what I want to get. I want to get the CLI of this particular Junos router. Boom, I'm in operational mode. You can tell by this symbol here that you're in operational mode. Now, in operational mode, this is typically where you do your kind of show commands and monitoring commands. Okay, think of like operational behavior. You don't do much of any configuration in this particular mode. But if I wanted to get into configuration mode, or I want to edit the configuration, I would type in the edit command. And now I'm in configuration mode. And you can tell that by the pound sign. And you can also see all the time when you're in this particular hierarchy, it will show you here in these square brackets kind of where you are. You're in edit mode. And of course, if I said, I want to get into the system and type in system, or edit system that is, notice that now I'm in edit system mode. So it kind of shows you this hierarchy as you get deeper and deeper into the path. Now, right now, I'm in this configuration mode. If I want to get out of configuration mode, I can hit exit a couple of times and exit back. So now I'm in operational mode. If I want to get out of operational mode and back into the root, I would type exit again, and I'm back at the root. I could even go even farther and just exit and log out and have to log back in again. Okay? So we have to master those basics. Now we've discovered two things. We've discovered how to simply get around from root to CLI and then to operational mode and to configuration mode and back out to the login prompt. Okay, very important information. We've also discovered that we have to upgrade this operating system. So I think we should focus on that because we want to learn on a newer operating system. Right on? So let's focus on that. And we'll start by upgrading my other router, my Juniper J2320. Okay, your next mission, if you decide to accept it, and I know you will, is to understand the Juniper Web Device Manager. Now, this is also referred to commonly in the Juniper world as JWeb. Now, funny I use the word commonly. This is not a tool that's used commonly, okay? Typically we use the CLI. The JWeb is okay for, a novice to go in and kind of use a graphical user interface. You might use the JWeb, initially to configure your router or your switch. I like to use the JWeb to do maintenance, okay, or go to the maintain area of the web manager. And that actually happens to be about all that you'd be expected to know for the exam, okay? And once you get past the JNCIA, you probably won't ever even be tested on the JWeb again. It's all going to be in the CLI. And most Junos aficionados are going to stay in that command line interface, okay? But I like to use the JWeb to upgrade my operating system. So we're going to kind of kill several birds with one stone here. We'll familiarize ourselves with the JWeb. We'll talk about getting connectivity. I'll review a couple of things here, and then we'll actually go through the process of upgrading a 2320 to a brand new Junos operating system, which is something that you may have to do right when you go on the job. Let's assume that when you walk into Nugget Lab, they've told you, you know what? what, we're going to go ahead and get another router. We want to deploy it out for a certain area, and when you get that router from the vendor, it's got an older Junos on it, and you want to get it up to, let's say, 11.1. So what would you do? Well, you could use a CLI, but the JWeb is a great way to go. So we'll look at it there. Now first, let me talk about some of the other ways, and with some visuals here, some of the other ways that we would be accessing this router typically. Now, if you're working with a Juniper device at home, or maybe you've got you're at the small business here, your small enterprise, and your desk is actually sitting there right next to all the equipment, that'd be kind of a bummer because it's loud and it's hot. But in that case, you would basically connect right from your management station to the console port on the device. So here is our rollover cable, and when you purchase your router or your switch brand new, they're going to send you either a cable like this, or it'll be a rollover cable that has 2 jacks on it, and then they'll have an adapter that you can connect. So this is our serial connector that goes right into here where it says number 6 on this HP box here. You would put that, the male part of the connector, right in there into this, the female part on the chassis. And then you'll take that cable, you'll connect the rollover cable not over here to any of these Ethernet ports, but you want to put it right here into the console. Okay, the one to the right of it is the aux. Okay, we're not going to be using that. We definitely want to use the console port. And of course, then you could bring up TerraTerm or Windows Terminal or PuTTY or Secure CRT or whatever, and then you go ahead and manage that device through the CLI. As soon as you plug it into this port and you power up your Juniper router, you'll start to see the boot up process, and then it will bring you up to the initial prompt, and then you can do your thing. Okay, that's the typical kind of small office, home office, lab way you would connect to your device. What I'm doing here is I'm actually going in and I'm taking this particular serial and I am plugging it into the console port on a kind of an older 2512 Cisco router. So this 2512 Cisco router is actually what I use as an access server, okay? And I use this to get out of band, so we call that OOB, access to all the devices in my rack. And you saw earlier, you know, the diagram of the rack that I have in my office. And so this is this kind of a SCSI type cable that you connect to these ports. So there's 2 of these on the back of the 2512. So each one of these cables, these are called octal cables because they have 8 connectors. So this is basically, this little connector right here is what we see down here, right? This connects to the console ports. But with 2 octal cables, I can connect to 16 devices. So 8 of them out of this, 8 of them out of this. And so basically I screw this onto the back, and these are all numbered 1 through 8, and then I would just take that from this octal cable and I would plug that octal cable into the console port on my router. As a matter of fact, I've got these connected to all the console ports on all the devices. So then when I go into my actual terminal client, like in my case TerraTerm, I can access all of my devices in an out-of-band fashion. In other words, I'm not using the production traffic or production network. So those are the typical ways you would connect for CLI access. But with JWeb, we're not going to use that console port. Now, before we go connect with JWeb, let's take one of the soon-to-be famous Michael Shannon sidebars. Okay. Now remember, we're going to use the JWeb and the maintain area of the graphical interface to go in and upgrade our operating system. Well, remember how I mentioned in the beginning of this nugget how important it is to go in early on the job and get all the documentation. So you want to make sure that you have the access to Juniper networks that that company, Nugget Lab, is using to get there. So you want to get those credentials, and you probably even have your own user account with Juniper, of course. Either way, you want to go up there and you want to go to the support area, and you're going to find the newest operating system you want to install. So that's what I did. I went up here and got the J-Series Junos install package, and it's going to be basically 11.1 RX4. Now, by the time you're looking at this Nugget series, there very likely will be a more recent release, okay? Anything in the 10s, you're really doing fine. As a matter of fact, the higher end exams at this point, they just use the 10 dot code. So you don't have to have the most brand spanking new Junos release. But I'm using 11.1, it's the newest, so hey, why not? And so I went ahead and just downloaded this install package, and I put it in a location on my management machine so that when I open up the JWeb, I can go and browse to it, find that package, and install it on my router. And by the way, I'm going to update both of my routers, my 2320 and my 2350, with this 11.1 Junos release. So here's what I'm going to do with a Juniper router or a switch just out of the box, okay? And I want to do an initial JWeb configuration and possibly be prepared to upgrade the operating system. So this is something I would do, right off the bat at Nugget Lab. They've purchased this 2320, and how do I want to approach this? I know I'm going to upgrade the operating system. I might want to do some basic initial configuration with the graphical interface. What do I do? Well, in this case, I'm going to come down to the Ethernet cable on this particular workstation, my management station, and I'll plug the RJ45 connector or the Cat 5e or Cat 6 cable into here, and then I'll connect to the first port, FE00 or GigE00. Okay, in my case it's GigE00. So I just connect that cable directly to it, right? They're both powered off at this point. Oh, by the way, I want to make sure that my adapter that is bound to this Ethernet adapter, so inside of it, I want to make sure that the TCP/IP configuration for that network connection, I'm going to either do one of two things. I'll make it a DHCP client, so I'll choose the radio button that says you're a DHCP client, or I can go ahead and give it an IP address. If I do, and I'm connecting to this port GE00, I want to make sure it's on the 192.168.1.0/24 network, but don't choose 1, okay? You cannot choose 1 because 1 is what will automatically be assigned to this when you bring up this router. Now, this assignment of assigning this address to 1.1 and it being an actual DHCP server is something that only happens in RAM memory in the initial running of the router. Okay, once you save your first configuration, that capability is gone. Okay, so before you save your first configuration, you're probably going to want to go and make this port right here, this port or maybe the fourth port, whatever you want to do, or any other port, make that your management port. So you want to do that, and we can do that in the JWeb, as a matter of fact. So again, this adapter here for this Ethernet needs to be either DHCP client, or you need to go ahead and make it on this 1.0 network, something between 1 and 224. Now I went ahead and made mine a DHCP client, right? Now what I'm showing you up here is, I'm actually using HTTP initially, so it's not going to be a secure connection. After the fact, later on, if you want to manage your device in a secure fashion using basically SSL TLS, then you need to go into the CLI and go and configure this command, set system services web-management HTTPS, if you want to do secure web access through the JWeb, which typically in a production environment you're going to want to do that. Okay. By the way, this is also a test tip. You have to know that command for the exam. Okay, so at this point my Ethernet cable is connected from this port to the first GigE00 port on my router. They're both powered down. I'm going to power up the router first. Okay, and I'm going to wait for the status light, which is right here. There's a status light. When that status light is solid green, not blinking green, but solid green, at that point I will power up this management workstation, and since it's got a DHCP client looking for a DHCP server, it will automatically be assigned a IP address from the DHCP server on the router of something in the 192.168.1 network. Okay, mine actually got 1.101. That was the one that was assigned to me. Okay, that's fine. Now I can go open up my browser, my Mozilla browser or IE or whatever I want to use, and I'm going to type in the IP address of this router. The default address is 192.168.1.1. Okay, type that in and we'll be able to access our Juniper Web Device Manager. Okay, that's exactly what I've done here. Alright, I put in 192.168.1.1 and it connected to my Juniper router asking me for a login. Now at this point I have not configured any root authentication on this device. This is pretty much, out of the box, fresh device. So the username is root, and there is no password, so we'll just put in root and then log in. And it's going to show you here, you've got no host name configured. You're logged in as root, right? And you have not identified yourself, so that you get the initial setup right away. And my resolution that we're looking at right here is really, it's not conducive to looking at a GUI, okay? I'm at 800 by 600. That's what we really do to make these nuggets, as optimal as possible. So I may have to drag and drop a little bit, okay? So I could say the host name is going to be, let's say, well, how about J2320, okay? I'm going to give it a root password, verify it. I can do some other stuff as well. We can go down here. I'm not going to do the time. We'll do that in the CLI, network stuff. Just the things that are obviously in red I have to do right away. How about management access? Okay. We want to allow Telnet access? Yeah, let's allow Telnet access. Let's allow JunoScript over ClearText access, as well as allowing Secure Shell access. Click on Apply. Now we're going to see the four main areas of JWeb. And by the way, from this point on, it's pretty much safe to say that from an exam standpoint, you're not going to ever be really expected to configure anything in JWeb. But you could come in here, of course, to the configure area and configure most of the aspects of your router, as you can see here, right? Authentication, network address translation, security, IPsec, VPN, routing and switching, class of service, on and on we go. But you're not going to typically use the JWeb to do that. You may use the JWeb to monitor. That's possible, but most experienced Junos engineers and practitioners are going to use the CLI. The main reason I'll come over here is the maintain area. And by the way, on the exam, you have to remember the maintain tab, okay? And by the way, what do we do on the maintain tab? You need to know this. You can do file management. You can do configuration management, okay? You can expand that out. So you can upload software, okay? You can look at a history. You can go to the software area, upload a package. You can manage your licensing here, okay? Because your licenses are going to basically add new features. For example, there's advanced BGP licenses. It's not installed on this device, but if I wanted to go pay for that and do it, I would do it here, most likely in the maintain area. Okay, so this is the typical reason we use maintain. Now the software area is what I want to do right now. I want to go to upload package, and I want to go, browse and upload and install a package. So let's go do that. I'm going to go to this apps area, and I've got a bunch of software in here. What I'm looking for, though, is this Junos JSR 11.1 R6.4 domestic. That's the TGZ file I want to go ahead and bring up here. So I found it. Now I'll upload and install the package and say, you know what, if necessary, let's go ahead and reboot. All right, upload and install. And that, my friend, is how I would use the JWeb. We're not going to sit around and wait for this, but again, that's how you get connected through JWeb. And we, of course, use the maintain area primarily, and we can upload packages right here. All right. Okay, the install process is done, and my router rebooted. And once it did, I came over to the monitor area up here, went to System View and System Information. And the reason I'm here is to just make sure that I got my software the way I wanted it. And you can see that here's my Junos software version 11.1 R64. That's what I'm shooting for. Here's the host name. The J2320 is the host name. Now I do want to go ahead and get an IP address, a management IP address configured for this device. So let's go ahead and do that next. Let's go to the configure area up here and go to interfaces. And let's make sure that our logical unit 0 on GigE00 is going to be our management interface. So we've got management. We'll click on that option. We could enable switching, which means basically we're going to allow this router port to do switching. So it would have VLAN information on it. Be a trunk port, but we're not going to make it a switching port. And that really kind of goes into the whole concept of how these devices are really switches and routers. We really break the mold of the traditional, this is a layer 2 switch and this is a layer 3 router. Okay, so I'll click on OK. It's really important to go and commit that change of this management interface while you're in this session, so that if I want to come back into the JWeb later, I've already now configured that interface as my management interface and I won't have any problems with it. Now, we're not going to be doing much of anything in the JWeb, but again, you might want to get your hands on this and kind of play with it a little bit and look at some of the different configuration areas. We're going to be focusing our configuration on the CLI. So let's get back to that command line interface. Let's watch a boot process. This is actually my switch, my Junos Juniper EX switch. I should have some nice background listening music maybe, but I don't. You can see us mounting everything and doing verifications of packages. This is a brand new out-of-the-box device, so this is what you would see the very first time you're basically plugging in that switch and getting an access to the device. File system marked clean, that's a good sign. Creating initial configuration. This is going to be a factory default configuration here. It's going to load it up into volatile memory. I may cut out some of these long waiting periods, so that took about a minute and a half. Additional daemons or services. All right. This is what we're going to see the very first time you come into a brand new device. It'll say amnesiac, which is kind of what it is. It's an amnesiac. It has no previous memory of anything, right? So this is what you would see on a clean system right out of the box. So the login, as I mentioned, is going to be root. That's the only user we have at this point. Type in root, and there is no password. Okay, you have to configure this initial, what we call root authentication on the device. Now notice on this switch that let's go ahead and clear this up a little bit here. Well, before I do this, notice that the operating system is Junos 11.1R3.5. This is from June of 2011, so this is a really new operating system on this switch, so I'm not going to have to upgrade the OS, the Junos, on this switch. But there I am at the root, and of course looking at what I would call the shell prompt, okay, or the % sign. At this point we know if we want to do any configuration or any observation or verification, we have to get into the command line interface CLI. Okay, so here I am, the root user, at the operational mode prompt. If I want to get to the configuration mode, remember, just type in edit. I want to edit it. If I want to get back, I can do exit. The most common thing you're going to do in operational mode is you're going to do show commands. So one of the things I might want to do right off the bat is show me information about this chassis, right? So type in show chassis. Let's put a question mark in there and get some of our possibilities. Okay, I could see the hardware, show chassis hardware, show chassis MAC addresses. Okay, show chassis temperature thresholds if you're worried about that. Let's go ahead and do a show chassis hardware command. By the way, I hit the up arrow to get back to that. And one of the main things about coming into this area that you'll want to do is, if you don't have the documentation on all of your devices, the show chassis hardware command, which you need to remember for real world and for the exam, is a good place to quickly come in and find out the serial number of your chassis. Okay, and that serial number is important because you'll need it. You want to go up to juniper.net and register all of your devices with Juniper. Okay, always want to do that. So that's one of our most important show commands that I'll show you right off the bat. Now let's talk a little bit about this chassis, about the operating system Junos. One thing I mentioned is that we notice that we have the same Junos operating system installed on the switch, the EX switch, that I have on the Juniper router. Well, the network operating system is critical, okay, because it has a huge impact on the overall operations of your device and your devices, security, performance, reliability, all of those things. But it's one single operating system based on, as I said, FreeBSD. Now, why is that significant, you might be asking me? Well, it's significant because they want you to know that for the exam, okay? That it's one operating system across all of their different platforms. But this is a lot different than other vendors. For example, if we look at Cisco, and I'm just going to be typing it, let me just clean this up and I'll just type some things out here. If I was looking at Cisco, for example, and I'm a CCNP and CCNP security, for me to operate in the Cisco environment, I have to know the IOS, okay, which is the router or the integrated services router operating system. I also deal with, I don't want to hit enter there, but I also have to deal with intrusion prevention systems, right? So IPS. So I have to know the IPS operating system. And the IPS operating system is actually kind of a hardened, embedded Red Hat Linux. I think now it's version 7, okay? So I have to know that. If I want to work on a firewall or an adaptive security appliance, right, I have to know the ASA, the adaptive security appliance, which is similar to the iOS, but it's not the iOS. And if I'm on a 6509 Catalyst switch, for example, I may have to know the Cat OS. So do you see what I'm getting at here? Other vendors, you may have to master multiple operating systems, and each one of them can have significant differences down to the very core level. Okay, some can be Unix-like, some can be really actually Linux, and so the list goes on and on. One of the major advantages to having one network operating system with Junos is that the Juniper engineers are building on top of the same code set, and then they're appropriately sharing this code across all of their platforms that are running Junos. So the enterprise devices have the same hardened implementation of the OSPF routing protocol that's been running in service providers for years and years. It is the same exact code set. And let me tell you, this is a huge advantage. One of the things I love about Junos so much is regardless of the device I'm on, even on the security gateway, I'm dealing with the Junos OS. I don't have to relearn some ASA operating system or relearn some IPS operating system. And trust me, I've been teaching that Cisco stuff for years, and it is a major headache for me to have to be able to go back and forth. And I mentioned to you that, as I went through this Nugget series, that I would from time to time kind of, for those of you people out there who know Cisco to some degree, kind of turn you on to some of the core differences. Well, this is the core difference, okay? Well, I think that's pretty good for getting started with the J-Series router and our EX Series switch. Like I said, this is the last time we'll probably be looking at a switch until we get to the JNCIS. But I think we're ready to move on now to our next nugget, where we're going to have a couple of nuggets here on user interface options. I know you're chomping at the bit to kind of dig into Junos here, and I want to take you much further, but I think we pretty much wrapped up what I want to cover in this first nugget. Wow, you really have arrived, and hopefully there's no turning back now. You've gotten a taste of Juniper and Junos, and you're really excited about moving forward on this journey, and I'm really excited about going along this journey with you. So in this particular nugget here, in getting started with the J-Series router and EX switch, we really looked at the login process, just kind of basically talked about the root account and the importance there. I went through the process of upgrading the OS, showed you connectivity options, got a chance to look at the JWeb. So a lot of the preliminary basic things you would do early on in the process, where you're just getting access to a router or switch for the first time, or you're just pulling that device out of the box for the first time, right? And then we finally kind of looked at the boot up process and checked out an EX Series switch that's brand new out of the box to see what that looks like when you're logging on as the root user for the first time, and then also, of course, that very important show system chassis command to find out the serial number, which you're going to need to go register your devices. Unless you want to just look at the back of the device, you can do it that way, of course, as well. But I think this wraps up our first real content nugget. I hope this CPT nugget has been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing.